Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about all sorts of things from the Fantastic Four to mimics from Dungeons and Dragons. But before we get into that, smash that like button, check to make sure you're still subscribed, and as always, leave us a comment. That helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but more importantly, we love hearing from you guys. We have an awesome community here, and that's all thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, all that said, let's get into it. So, I've been the game master for this game for decades now, right? And me having to constantly come up with a new adventure all the time can start to feel after a while like Sisyphus rolling a boulder uphill for eternity, right? And I get burnt out and I'll just scroll through the internet or something. And if I see something interesting, oftentimes I will try to come up with an adventure around that idea, right? And so at this point in our timeline, we've gotten to the big quarantine where everybody had to stay at home. The whole world seemed to be locked down, right? And during that time, a lot of people started playing Dungeons and Dragons, people who had never played it before. And in my humble opinion, role playing games had kind of fallen out of fashion. I was doing it, of course, because, and I don't care what other people do one way or another, really. I just do my own thing. But other people started to get interested in it. People that I knew started to message me and ask me questions about, hey, you're a gamer, right? What's that about? So I was kind of happy about that. We picked up some new players during that period. We were playing online. We tried to do Roll 20, I think it's called, and I was having a hard time with like the technical aspects of the website, so I didn't love that. We tried some other stuff like Skype and Zoom and things of that nature. And at any rate, though, I was really happy that RPGs were kind of making a comeback because people craved that social element. They weren't really getting it anywhere else. And so I started to get stuff on my feed when I'd be on social media. I'd be scrolling down through stuff, and what started to pop out at me were images of mimics. And, don't take this the wrong way, especially for everybody listening who is really into D&D, more power to you. Just personally, I've never been that into the fantasy genre. I've always been into the superhero genre, right? So it's kind of like D&D's just never really been my thing. And like I've certainly played it, but I gotta say, I feel like we never did much with mimics. We did a lot with like orcs and elves, and there were just other things that is what we did the most of. And I'm sure at some point we had encountered a mimic, but I couldn't even, at the time when I ran this, I couldn't even remember a specific instance of a mimic. So I started thinking about those. And in our game in the past, like I mentioned this before, there was the old Dungeons and Dragons cartoon in the 80s, and we actually ran a game about that where pretty much the events of the cartoon happened. Um, and then the kids made it back, but there were other characters that went with them in our version. And then one of those guys was Gary Gygax, who invented D&D. And so in our world, the idea was he had really gone to this place, and when everybody made it home, he turned it into a role-playing game. So the irony was in the Earth K game world, You can play Dungeons and Dragons, but you could also literally go visit the D&D world too, right? So we had set up this idea that there were something called spelljammers that are these sort of Dungeons and Dragons style airships, and they travel from planet to planet, and they would secretly come to Earth and nobody knew this was happening. And so I came up with this idea that Mimic had actually come to Earth and nobody knew it. And there was sort of a secret invasion that had taken place, and that the mimics had gone to the most populated areas. So in this case, specifically, we're talking about New York City. And I had decided that, because I was thinking of that general shape of a treasure chest, how it's kind of a big box shape and it's got like a lid thing on the top. And I started thinking about dumpsters. And so I came up with this idea that there were mimics that had disguised themselves as dumpsters outside of restaurants. And this made sense to me because I was trying to think of, like, I don't know if ecosystem is the right word or what, but just this idea that, like, when I was younger, I would have jobs working in various restaurants. And at the end of the day, a lot of times you would take a bunch of that food that nobody ate and you'd go throw it in the dumpster, right? And I was thinking, this is great for a mimic. The mimic could just sit there and do nothing, right? And like, I was playing them as intelligent so that if it attacks a person, it knows that people are going to attack it. If it reveals that it exists, people are going to attack it, right? But if it just hangs out behind a restaurant and plays it cool, it's going to be fed for the rest of its life, pretty much, right? So that was this idea I came up with. And then in the game, quarantine was happening. And so everybody had to stay at home and nobody was eating in the restaurants, which meant the mimics were now starving. And so they no longer had the patience to play it cool and to pretend to just be a mundane dumpster anymore. And the few people, essential workers and stuff like that, that were on the street, the mimics were attacking them, right? And I guess I just thought it was kind of funny. Like, it was weird and it was kind of funny to me. And a lot of times to me, weird sort of equals cool. So I really liked the idea of the dumpster mimics. I even thought it was just a fun phrase to say. So then we were like, well, so who's going to fight him? And I was like, well, I think it would be kind of all the heroes of New York. So like Spider-Man could fight dumpster mimics and the Ninja Turtles could fight dumpster mimics. Particularly, I guess, would be a really good Turtles adventure. But we ended up not doing the Turtles thing. We ended up doing Fantastic Four. And I guess what my thought process was there was we decided that Reed Richards had so much going on in terms of science that, first of all, it would be pretty easy for him to build like a mimic detector. And so he did. And he had, how do we want to describe it? Um, you know how Pokemon Go works? How you like hold out a cell phone and then you can see the Pokemon character on the screen of your phone, even though with your naked eyes you don't see anything there in real life, right? What do they call that? Augmented reality? Whatever. You get the gist, right? So basically, they did that, but the idea was you would look at a dumpster and we gave the gadget the X-ray vision power. So the idea was that if it was a mimic inside of the material the dumpster was made out of, you would see things like weirdly shaped bones and veins and stuff like that, right? Because it's a shapeshifter pretending to be a dumpster. So that was kind of our thinking, was there'd be this biological component that would show up on the scanner. And then so like the thing would of course conclude that it is clobbering time, because of course it is. And he'd go in there and pound these things. I don't know. I just thought it was funny that you had to fight dumpsters, you know? I loved it. And then they're trying to grab him with the tongue and pull him in, and so on and so forth. And like that was it. There's honestly not a lot to the story other than mimics had invaded. Nobody knew this had happened, and the hero started hunting them down. And they kept doing that until they couldn't find anymore. And I did escalate it. It was more than one game session. It was several games long. The players seemed to like it. They thought it was kind of funny and weird and cool and all that. And then I started to branch out. And the idea was the mimics sort of knew the players were on to the whole dumpster thing, so they started to do other stuff. And I remember at one point, the thing that seemed to get the brunt of it, and I think it was kind of because he can take some damage, he's tough. But he went to put an envelope into a mailbox, like the kind of like big metal mailboxes you have in a city on like a sidewalk, and then that tried to eat him. Um, I remember thinking that was kind of funny at the time. Like just in my mind, I could imagine the thing getting attacked by a mailbox with teeth. So yeah, we were doing that sort of thing for a while. The mimics were branching out into other stuff, and I left the ending kind of ambiguous. Like, well, are there no more mimics? Or did they just turn into something else and are laying low? And I've done it a lot over the years, but it's because I like it. Um, because I like movies like, for instance, John Carpenter's The Thing, which seems like kind of a pun since we're talking about Ben Grimm. I don't mean it to be. Or Body Snatchers or whatever, I always thought that sort of thing was kind of cool. So that's sort of where I was going with this. And we were kind of making mimics a bigger threat than any of my gamers had like thought of them before. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. It went well. It was open ended, so that if I want to bring them back later, I can, or if I never get around to it, it seems like they were defeated, and like it works either way. But that was the notorious dumpster mimics campaign. So we liked this one. We hope that you enjoyed hearing about it. If so, as always, smash that like button, check to see if you're still subscribed, and leave us a comment. Um, and from everybody here associated with the longest role-playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.